Hello and welcome back to the University of Michigan Teach Out on Basic Income Strategies. I'm here with Elizabeth Rhodes, who is the Research Director for the Y Combinator Basic Income Experiment in the United States, a major effort that's just getting underway and trying to, you might say, go boldly where no basic income research project has gone before in the United States. Beth, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this project. What is Y Combinator, and why are they interested in basic income, and how did this all get going?
Sure. So Y Combinator is a startup accelerator in Silicon Valley, which has incubated some fairly well-known startups, Reddit, Dropbox, Airbnb. And Sam Altman is the president of YC. And he decided a while back to start researching, sort of doing some nonprofit research work, looking at types of questions that maybe are still a little bit out there or that have a long time horizon and that others aren't thinking about quite yet. And his first project was OpenAI, which is working on developing generalized artificial intelligence in a nonprofit setting so that no one company owns some of this technology. And it was through there and through, working with all these different new companies that are coming along, he started, I think, thinking more about what the future of work will look like. And certainly from his perspective, you're seeing automation changing the nature of work quite rapidly, a time when many existing jobs could be lost. And so I think that was where he was thinking about when he decided, we heard a lot about basic income, let's study that. And so that was sort of his frame of mind. And he put out a call to researchers. I was just finishing my PhD at Michigan, not thinking at all about the future of work, more about poverty and inequality. And so together we have sort of created a study that I think mixes some of those ideas. I think, certainly there are lots of conversations about the future of work and would basic income be one way to sort of smooth the transition as certain jobs disappear, new jobs are created. But there's also a recognition that in a place where there is so much abundance and there is so much wealth, it is sort of a moral imperative to address the poverty. And, the existing safety net has so many holes in it. There are a lot of people that are, categorically ineligible. We moved so far away from giving cash assistance. Everything's, a lot of things are in kind or, heavily conditioned. And I think, it's partly this sort of Silicon Valley ethos of just giving people the freedom to define their lives. And so, what has sort of come together is a study where I think we're trying to think about the future, but also ask a lot of questions that can inform policies right now. What happens when you give lower income individuals unconditional cash? Where $1,000 a month does not, meet every basic need. It certainly provides some economic security. And so, we're really interested in looking at what happens when you give people unconditional cash.
Yeah, great. And I imagine a lot of times with studies in the social sciences, you have some trouble with recruitment of study subjects. And this might be one of those research projects that has no trouble getting people to say, yes, I'll take $1,000 a month.
Maybe. No, I think so. I mean, I'm a little nervous, and we've done some piloting, so I was really nervous at first that people would think it's a scam.
Yeah, they might think, what? Nobody does this. Why are you coming to my door?
Exactly. And then talking to some of the people that we started with, they said, oh, I didn't really actually believe I would get it, but I figured I had nothing to lose, and let's see. It wasn't until after they first started getting a couple of deposits in their account that they were like, oh, this is for real. So,
yeah. Did you learn anything else from the pilot? Things that surprised you, or things that are informing what you're doing now in the full phase of the study?
Definitely. I mean, before we even started the pilot, I learned that it's a lot harder to give away cash than you might think. They're especially with people who are getting existing benefits. But I think we did learn. To be honest, I wasn't expecting to see much. If you give people $1,000 a month for a year, this first very small study, it had 6 people in it. So everything I'm going to say is completely anecdotal.
Yeah.
But, I wasn't expecting, it's sort of 1 year, it's a short period of time that really much would change. And, for some people it didn't, it was, hey, it allowed me to pay my bills and worry a little bit less every month. And, over time, I think, you would see some big changes as that reduction in sort of chronic stress and the ability to think about, beyond just how am I going to pay this month's bills. But I think for other people, there were 2 in particular. There was one young woman who had a part-time seasonal job, and we're piloting this in the Bay Area in Oakland, and housing is extraordinarily expensive. So she was living sort of couch to couch, and when she received the basic income, she actually was able to move out to a little bit suburban area where the housing is a little bit more affordable. She was able to get a full-time job instead of the sort of part-time job, and get an apartment, and was living closer to family, was sort of helping out with childcare. That stability, provided by this actually allowed her to work more, which sort of contradicts a lot of the conventional wisdom that if you give people cash, they're just going to sit around and do nothing. But then there was someone else who was a student at the time and was working a couple, part-time jobs, and she was able to quit, focus more on school, and also she became more involved in the activist community, I think started a band, was able to move out of a relationship that wasn't so great, but she was in because of housing costs. So I think we saw, even in that 6 people, quite a diversity. And so it makes me really excited to see, with a lot more people in a longer term, what types of things we'll see.
It looks like. Although, what you point out raises this question of the heterogeneity that you might expect, that people are all going to react differently to this benefit, and some might work more, some might have good reason to work less, some might keep on doing what they're doing but have lower levels of stress and be more productive. So it'll be interesting to see how, in the aggregates in this larger sample, what the results look like.
I think that's the big challenge for us, is recognizing that there are a lot of intermediate things we need to measure or try to get the reasons behind why people work more or less, or what that affects. I mean, we're having a significant qualitative component to really delve into that more deeply. But even within surveys, there are things we can ask to make sure we get at not just like on aggregate the change in work hours, but why, or what about particular jobs. And so I think it's a huge challenge. I mean, so many of the outcomes could go up or down and be positive or negative either way, and so figuring out how to document that and try to make sense of that is definitely going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so tell us about the way that the full study is going to roll out, and for people who don't have experience with what experiments look like, what's the design, and why are you doing it the way you're doing it, and where, and what kind of data are you going to collect?
So we're planning a randomized controlled trial, which is basically we'll be randomly selecting a group of people in 2 different states in the U.S. That meet certain criteria. So we are limiting it to ages 21 to 40, partly because we think that it could have a different effect across the life cycle. Would like to see a number of children in the sample, and not that they're receiving the money personally, but they're in households of people that are.
Right.
And there's an income cap at the median income, but we're undersampling, so we'll have a sample that skews much lower income, but there will be people whose income is up to the median. And basically the sort of general is we're comparing a group of people who receive $1,000 a month for 3 or 5 years to an statistically identical group of people that don't. So everything else, because of all the randomization, basically these 2 samples should be roughly equivalent. So hopefully the goal is to be able to isolate the effects of that unconditional cash. And It is, often called sort of the gold standard in policy research. It does have limitations, and that's why we're trying to, we can see correlations and sort of overall effects, treatment effects, but we can't really get into the how and the why. And so that's why we're having, doing a lot of open-ended interviews and trying to get at that.
Yeah.
But basically, half of or a percentage of the people will receive $1,000 a month for 3 or 5 years, depending on the group. And then the control group, the people that don't receive it, will get $50 a month. And so then we'll be comparing, it's randomly sample. We will have, rough quotas so that we have about 50% men, 50% women, that we have representation among different race and ethnicities, and within that income range that we have representation. And then we'll be, at baseline, when we enroll people, we will be collecting quite a bit of data on, I think in some past studies of this type, they've really focused on labor market. So if people get cash, do they work more or less?
Yeah.
So we're definitely taking a much more holistic view about how this affects individuals and households, not just because, I think even subjective measures of well-being, then, a lot of research shows those affect those economic outcomes, or whether people work or don't work. And so we're really trying to get a much bigger picture of how this is affecting recipients. And so we'll be doing this in-person surveys at the beginning of the study, the middle, and the end. And we'll be collecting, doing smaller or shorter surveys, maybe every month, every other month, on the web or mobile phone, just checking in, getting a little bit more granular data on, outcomes, including sort of health and mental health, financial health, and resilience. If they encountered an unexpected expense, would they be able to pay that without having to file for bankruptcy or struggling in other ways? Certainly subjective well-being, material well-being, housing stability and quality. For children, looking at, education and non-parental care. So what types of, if their parents are working, are they, the regularity of care, and who's providing it. Really pretty wide range of outcomes. And the other, besides surveys, we'll also be using administrative data collected by the government. So earnings data from the IRS, and receiving existing benefits, program participation. There are a lot of different outcomes we can collect that way as well.
Cool. So you're going to take a sample of people and randomly pick some who are going to get $1,000 a month, some who will get $50 a month, and then the goal is to look at the difference in outcomes between those two groups. So what's the difference of an added $950 per month over the course of 3 years? Is that right?
3
Yes,
years?
most people will get it for 3. There'll be a smaller group that gets it for 5, but the bulk of people will get it for 3.
Yeah, because it's an interesting question of, what's the time horizon where it really has an impact on someone? Is it the getting it for a year sort of impact trajectories, 2 years, 3 years? And is that the goal with having a group that gets it for 5 years?
Well, I think the group is going to be small enough that we're not going to really be able to tell much between the two. I think more qualitatively, I think ideally 5 years would be better. I mean, we'd love to give it to everyone for 5 years in the sample, because I think it creates a much longer time horizon. But, in terms of the funding for the study and, wanting to have a large enough sample, we decided to go with 3 years, but then, some of our funders were really interested in the 5, or, really feel strongly about the time horizon. So we sort of compromised, as all research designs do, with a smaller group, so that we can qualitatively, begin to sort of, even though we won't have like statistically significant differences, but we can.
You'll learn something.
Yes.
Great. And so we're going to do this study for 3 years, and there'll be some research that comes out maybe along the way. What's the goal? What's the objective of doing a study like this? What do we think it will give us that we don't already have in the research literature?
I think there are a couple goals. I think there's this one big sort of idea that's really popular right now about universal basic income. We're not testing universal basic income. We're not giving it to everyone. But we're still beginning to sort of explore what a basic income could look like.
Yeah.
Then there's also a lot of questions, I think, that we're thinking about policies that lead up to a basic income. I mean, even right now, as the existing safety net has moved so far away from, we give out so little cash. And maybe we find that, the EITC is cash, but it's a lump sum. And we see that it doesn't necessarily smooth consumption over the course of the year. And so what if we find that this sort of monthly benefit provides, has different outcomes that we want that are important. So we change maybe part of it or all of it to be distributed monthly instead of yearly. Maybe, there's so many, especially in the Bay Area where housing is so expensive and other places, people are trying to sell food stamps to pay rent. And so maybe we convert, some benefits to cash or we reduce some of the conditionality because it turns out that people actually, know how to best meet their needs. And so I think there's just a lot of questions about how people would use cash or the benefits of cash versus some in kind that we can, hopefully contribute to. And there hasn't, there have been studies. I think the closest were the negative income tax studies, which also guaranteed an income. And that was in the 70s, 60s and 70s. But the labor market there were a lot of differences. The goal was really to look at labor market characteristics and whether people worked more or less. But then also, things are very different now. And I think this is different. The study's different in a number of ways. And we'll also just that longitudinal, fairly granular data about people's lives and their financial challenges and hopefully can illuminate. I mean, cash is not the silver bullet. And so what other challenges do people face? What other supports or other solutions to some of the problems we're facing? Yeah. Maybe it isn't basic income, but maybe we can begin to identify that through the study data.
Yeah. So if folks want to just follow along with what you're doing, are there ways for them to keep track of the Y Combinator Basic Income Experiment?
Yes, we have a website. It's ycr.org/basic income. And we'll be posting, we have an overview of what we're planning right now up there, but as we finalize our research design and all the types of data we're collecting, we'll be posting all of that there, and as well as updates, and eventually, as we have findings, we'll be sharing them there as well.
Great. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity selfishly to note that I got to play a small role in you getting into the basic income field.
A huge role. In many ways, not only because we talked about negative income tax in an independent study, and a paper that we wrote then turned into my interest in this, but also even before I interviewed, I talked to you about, okay, if you had this opportunity to design this, what would you want to know? And you've also been on our advisory board, so I think you played a very integral role in the study from its inception. So,
well, it's great to see a former student do such incredible work. Former student and now colleague, and I think really taking us to a new level of knowledge on this hot topic that I think can really inform policy making and our research on the lives of poor families in the United States. So thanks for all you're doing, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so that's Elizabeth Rhodes from the Y Combinator Basic Income project, and a really exciting segment to hear about this cutting edge research that's just starting to get going. And so I look forward to sharing the next segment with you and to joining you in the discussion chats as we go forward. Thank you.